the time that, just helps people with their everyday life and how to just make some small changes in your life that could potentially impact your future and in a better way. So when I think about savings and when I talk about savings, I think it's important if you are not disciplined, right? If you don't constantly, put money in your savings account, create an automated savings. Let it happen automatically. What do I mean when I say that? Set it up in your bank account, in your paycheck, whatever amount you get and you can afford to put away. Make sure that you set, if it's $50 per paycheck, if it's $100, whatever the amount is, let it come out of your pay weekly, bi-weekly, however often you get paid. Let it come out automatically, because I find that that helps people to be disciplined, right? So if you don't have that discipline to go into, I know there are some people that I just had a series in Westchester a few weeks ago, and people were like, you know what, I like to see how much I'm saving every single week. Everybody's not like that. Personally, I like to do it automatically. So I have several savings accounts and I'm always putting money away, but I don't do it, go in and transfer the funds. I set it up and I say $50, $100, 2,000, whatever the amounts are, I have it going into my savings account. And I also do it in several savings accounts, right? So I like to say you should diversify everything. So diversify your income if possible, but also diversify your savings. And when we get to investing, you want to diversify that as well, right? You need to understand your cash flow, right? Understand how much money you're getting in and how much money is going out. So that's your cash flow. Whatever you get paid, whatever you get in annuity, whatever you get in your retirement, if you're retired and you're getting a weekly, pay from your retirement account, make sure that you understand what that amount is and also what you're paying out. So that is your cash flow, the inflows, and the outflows. So what you're paying for your expenses. And then what are some of the saving barriers that we all have? So we're going to talk through some of those as well, because I find that a lot of people have these barriers, and when they don't check on them, when they don't tap in, when they don't do a pulse check, when they don't do an audit of some of these barriers, it ends up putting them in a negative position financially, where they're not able to save adequately and they're not able to put money away for their future. So that's important. And then we're going to talk about goal-based savings and what does that mean. There's strategies that you could put in place, and when people have a goal for where their money will go, they're usually more intentional with that. So some of the key concepts. Why is savings difficult? So anybody in the crowd, you could tell me, is savings difficult for you? Savings is difficult sometimes, right? Why? Why is it difficult? There's a no judgment zone, so you could just tell me, why is savings difficult? Life is expensive, right? That's one reason why it's difficult for people. Life is expensive. What's another reason why savings might be difficult? You may have competing priorities, right? Life is expensive. You have to pay your rent, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to pay your car note, your insurance, all of these things. So sometimes people find it hard to be able to save because of those things. And those are essential things. You can't avoid living someplace and having to pay for that. You can't avoid, even if you don't have a car, you take public transportation, you have to pay for your Metro North ticket or your subway ticket or your bus ticket, whatever. And those costs are always what? Going up. I have not heard one time where the cost of these items go down, right? So they're always increasing. Income volatility. How many people have experienced income volatility? And what does that mean, right? Sometimes your income is high, sometimes it's low. If you're not a salaried employee, and even sometimes when you are, jobs change. I just had a conversation with somebody on Sunday, actually two people, and they're in a space of stress because they're thinking they're going to lose their job. One person already did, and she's trying to figure out what to do next, right? Because the job market, her field is drying up. So income volatility can also put people in a stressful place where they can't save. So we're going to talk about how to find ways, effective ways to circumvent that. An emergency fund. How many people have an emergency fund in the audience? Everybody has an emergency. Everybody has an emergency fund. Now, if you don't have an emergency fund, it is essential. It's critical to have an emergency fund, and especially in this climate, right? Right now, there's so many things that's happening in the economy, and because of the uncertainties, it is so important to have an emergency fund. Now, for those of you who said you have an emergency fund, how many months does that cover? 6 months? Anybody else? How many months does your emergency fund cover? Just one? Okay. And if you're saving towards it, what is your goal? How many months do you think you should have for your emergency fund? 6? Okay. So I want minimum. Okay. I'm glad you said that, right? Because historically, you've been taught 3 to 6 months is enough. But look at the climate that we're in, and look at the climate that we've been experiencing for the last 6 years, right? There's so many things that's happening in the economy. I say minimum 12 months. And so if you're at 6 months, then start planning towards 12, right? So there's nothing wrong with getting to 6, because if you were taught 3 to 6 months was the threshold, that's where you should be, then build to that if you don't already have that. And once you get to that 6 month mark, build towards 12. And for me, honestly, because of the things that I've experienced personally, 2 years is comfortable. I need to be in a 2 year because I have a mortgage, I have car note, and I don't want to ever feel like I'm in a stressful place. So when I have these conversations and when I do workshops, I'm not telling people to, say put 3 to 6 months away in your emergency fund. I say minimum 6, but really I mean 12. But because sometimes if people have not started to do that, then you have to start somewhere. So if 6 months is where you are, that is good, but keep going. Don't stop there, right? Keep building towards that 12. And then when you get to 12, build to 2 if you possibly can. Because what I say is, and we're going to talk about investing, when you get to that comfortable place where your savings is able to cover your essential bills, right? Your rent, your mortgage. If God forbid some big emergency were to come up, you're able to cover it. Sometimes it's medical. Sometimes it's, issues with your home. You have a major leak in your house and now you have to figure that out. You have to pay for that. Sometimes it's the car, right? And you don't have money to go out and get a new car, so you have to fix the one that you have. And those are real big expenses that can eat into your everyday savings or just your income that's coming in. So that's why I say it's important to put enough away so that when these emergencies happen, these unexpected circumstances happen, you are prepared. And then we're going to talk about savings versus investing. When should you start investing? Because investing is important. Everybody should be investing because that's the only way you're going to be able to plan towards your future retirement, right? It's through investment. If you have money in an IRA, if you have money in an investment account, the stock market, whatever it is, that's for your future, right? That's investment. And you want to do effective investments so that you're earning gains, right? You're getting profits from that and you will be able to live on that in the future. But if you don't have an emergency fund today, should you be investing? Anybody? If you don't have an emergency fund account, should you be investing? Yet? Maybe? You want to build up to that, right? There's nothing wrong with investing, but the reason why I say secure that first, because when you're investing, especially if you're invested in the stock market, that money is not guaranteed. Investing is important, but it's for the long term. So that's not funds that you could take out or you should be taking out in the short term to pay for your everyday essentials. So though it's important, you want to make sure that you save first and have enough cushion there, and then you build towards investing. And so we talked a little bit about understanding your cash flow essentials. So the amount that you're getting in, your inflows and your outflows as well. And why income is saving is difficult because there's income volatility, There's rising costs, right? Things are expensive. If you go into the grocery store, everything is expensive. A loaf of bread. What you were able to pay for a loaf of bread 5 years ago, you're not able to do that today. And that's how the dollar works, right? The value of it today is not what it's going to be worth in the future. So that's also why investing is important. And then the competing priorities. That's usually one of those areas where people find it difficult to save because they're saying or thinking that I have to pay my bills, I have to pay my rent, and that is true. That is absolutely true. So here's what I say. This is what I've done personally, right? I save first. Why? Because if I'm putting money away, and again, we're going to dive more into this the final week, but if I'm putting money away, especially in a 401k that is pre-tax or an IRA that is pre-tax, right? You're not taxed on it today, you're taxed on it when you retire, and you pull it, or if you pull that money out before you retire, that's when you're taxed on it. If you put that money away, start putting that away today. One thing that it does from a tax perspective is that it lowers your taxable income. And you want to pay less taxes, right? I don't want to pay the government all this money because, I don't. So I say first, that's important for me. And that has worked. When I put money away in my savings account, then I always have money in my everyday savings, and I also have money in my emergency fund account. So those things are crucial. They're important to make sure that you're doing. So how many people here have ever experienced an emergency? Financial emergency, right? That you needed to pay for something and maybe you didn't have the money. Maybe you did. But we've all had some kind of financial emergency that we needed to pull money from somewhere and pay. And so that's why saving is important. Why? Because you don't want to rely on credit to pay for an emergency. Why? Because that will ultimately put you into a deeper financial hole. And that's what we want to circumvent. So that's why last week we talked about budgeting. And when you look at your budget, there should be a line for savings in there. There should be a line for emergency fund. There should be a line item there for investment. So it's crucial, right, to have all of these components laid out in your budget. It's important. Savings reduces stress. A lot of people are stressed about money. And the reason why we're often stressed about money is because we don't have enough in our savings, right? So if we have enough in our savings for any incidental that could come up, right, it lowers the stress level. And it's important to think about your mental health. It's important because that's usually what affects most of us, right? We start to feel stressed about money. Somebody I met recently, they're going through a situation with a parent that is in late stage of life. And that's a financial strain for that person because they're going to have to pay for these expenses. Now, if you don't plan effectively, that could unfortunately become stressful for that person, right? So that's why it's important that even if you've never saved before, if you've never budgeted before, start now. And it's also important for adults, parents, grandparents to do that so that the stress and strain doesn't fall on the next generation, their children, their grandchildren, right? So it's important to do that. So what are some types of savings? So as we're talking about savings, I'm going to keep hammering home on the emergency fund because I think a lot of people don't put money away or enough away for the emergency fund, right? So it's important, and I think you're going to continue to hear that theme as I speak today about the emergency fund. That is one type of saving that is important. So you want to have the emergency fund, but aside from that, you should have an everyday savings account separate from your emergency fund account. They are not one and the same. They should not be commingled. They should not even be in the same account. I don't even have mine in the same bank, right? Because that's an emergency. That's only for emergencies. If something happened, if you lose your job for a long period of time, you should be able to cover your everyday expenses without feeling that extra stress and strain. And it's very important. And then the other one is the long term, which is the investing, right? The investment is important for everyone. We should all be invested. And I'm going to tell you again, it should be diversified, right? You could invest in the stock market, you could buy stocks, you could buy ETFs, you could buy mutual funds, whatever it is. You could also invest in real estate, right? You could invest in land. There's certain things that you could have that will never lose its value. And so it's important to think about that. Now, remember I said before, for me, what works and what has worked over the years is that I automate my savings, right? So every single savings account that I have, it comes out automatically. I set it up. If it's $50 in my everyday savings account, I'm setting it up that that amount is coming out every single pay period, every single paycheck. But I also have the emergency fund account that I have my amount, my threshold that I set, and I make sure that the amount is going in that account also automatically. Every single time I get money, I pay myself, right? So you pay yourself first. That's what your savings is. It's you paying yourself first. So it's important. Start small. If you've never saved before, don't go out now and say, you know what, I need to save $10,000, and you never saved before. So start small. It needs to be realistic. Last week we talked about how your budget should match your real life. Your savings should match your real life. Don't go crazy, right? It should make sense. And as you're putting the money away, as you're putting funds in these accounts, again, it should be what you can afford to put away, right? So and that's why I said, even between the savings and investing, which one do? You should only invest what you could stand to lose, right? Because when you're investing in the stock market, there's no guarantee. It could go up and down. Last week, I think I bought some stuff, and then the day after, they all went red. And I'm like, what is going on? So usually, again, when you're investing, it's for the long haul. Unless you're a day trader and that's your job, and that's totally different, because that's no longer just investing for retirement or for your future life. Then use windfalls. So what are some windfalls, if you could think about it, and I'll explain what that means. When do you get some influx of money? What are some windfalls? So if you get a large amount of money, what would you consider a windfall? What is it? A bonus, exactly. A lottery. The lottery, if you won the lottery. A family member passing. Unfortunately, sometimes they leave, some inheritance behind. What is another windfall? Tax return. That's the one that I used for years. I would get my return, and instead of going out and going on a shopping spree, which I like to shop, but when I would get a tax return that is, in the thousands, I take the bulk of that money, at least 95% of that money, and I put it towards my emergency fund account. So that's a windfall. And a lot of people, they do the reverse, right? They get that money and they're like, well, it's time to go party. They go have a good time. Again, nothing wrong with having a good time, because that should be a line item in your budget. You should budget for entertainment, but should entertainment be your entire life and then you're stressed about bills? Absolutely not. So if you get a windfall, if you get a bonus, if you get money from your family member passing, unfortunately, or if you get tax return, we don't all get returns, right? Some of us, we're always owing, right? But if you do get a return, that's a windfall that you could put towards your emergency fund, because you're able to pad that really quickly, right? So instead of spending that, that's one thing that you could absolutely do. All right, so goal-based savings. What are some goal-based savings? What would you consider saving for a goal? Anyone? Vacation, yep, right? So that's a goal-based savings. Any other ones? A house, right? If you want a house, that's a goal-based savings. So you know that you will need $10,000, $15,000,